Well, it is now 10:30, and you are tuned into Brainstorming the Human Connection. It's brought to you by the South Dakota Humanities Council. My name is Lawrence Diggs. I'll be your host and inquisitor for our program today. I'd like to always remind people that this is an interactive program. We don't sort of twist your arm, but it's one of the kind of programs where we get value based on how much we put in, because many ideas, they are ideas that need to be wrestled with if we're going to get to know them. We need to push back. We need to brainstorm them, so to speak, put some stress on it. And you may not even subscribe to, let's say, the pushback. You might say, well, okay, I'm in favor of this idea, but I didn't really think it through this much. What happens if, there are all kinds of questions, and we can have not only comment, but we can have questions. We can challenge things that are being said. And this, we hope, is a safe space in which people can do just that. So in our chat section, if we have some links or something like that, our producers behind the computers will be dropping in links should they be relevant to this conversation. If you have some ideas or links that you think, or books that you think might help people, or a link to an idea, or a word even that you think that might help people to understand the subject better. Our topic today was going to be making films and exploring the trauma, I would say, our societal trauma of murdered and missing Indigenous women. I think that is a subject that has been too much overlooked over history, and so we may have some catching up to do. But unfortunately, the guest who was going to be talking about that got a sudden case of laryngitis, and and that means it's a little hard to talk if your voice doesn't work, and is unable to be with us. So we are going to kind of switch topics, and today I want to talk to you, or have you talk to each other, about changing thoughts into action. Throughout the kind of history of this Zoom conference, you might say, conversation, we have talked about a lot of different ideas. We've talked about everything from police work to, we've had a couple of cases where we've talked about murdered and Indigenous and missing Indigenous women. But we've talked about quite a few things. We've talked about food shortages. We've just a whole bunch of things. But the question is, like, what happens to those ideas? Where do they go? What do we do with them? And so I'd like to have a conversation with you about your ways that you change thoughts into action. I want to start by asking you if you have any particular program that we've done or that you've experienced here that is memorable to you. It's like, okay, that I remember that program and X, Y, and Z happened, or it affected me in some way. Does anybody have anything that they could share with us? Anybody? Kind of sound like after the minister talks and after coffee, you say, what was the sermon about? That happens too. But any memorable episodes, anything that we've discussed on here that you remember?
I just wanted to share that there were a couple programs that I tuned into, and one of them was on forgiveness, and the other one had to do with return of land. And those two stuck out in my mind as incredibly important discussions that could have been extended, or there could have been some more follow through for possible solutions. But those two came to mind, and I thought I would share that this morning.
Excellent. I think those are two really good examples of ones that really kind of cut to the core. You know, when you talk about forgiveness, as human beings, we make so many faux pas that I don't know what we would do without those. And I think that the land return issue is one that really speaks to that in a very tangible way. It's like, well, how do we get over an historical injustice that's brought to the forefront of our lives today in such a way that it becomes so entangled that we have a hard time talking about it, but we must. So now what, so to speak. So those were two that really came to mind for me. Anybody else? Vicki, did you have? I saw your mic was off.
Yeah, I did. It was kind of a faux pas I made. I was embarrassed. One of the things I noticed is that I have more of an insight into with the Native Americans and how we relate to them or don't, and how the reservation works. But I remember there was one gentleman, and because I never know exactly what term, culturally term, politically correct. And I said, so what shall I call you? And he said his name, and I was so sorry because I heard some new names like we're non-Indigenous. I mean, that's a name that we now have that's new to me. But I really realize that there are mistakes that we make that we don't really know what we're doing. And it was a good lesson on, I don't want to have to be so careful that I can't just be free to speak. But I learned a lesson on how Native Americans want to be called, their name as a general group, and who's sensitive to how you refer to them. That was a big learning curve for me.
Excellent. I think that is one of the goals of this brainstorming the human connection, is to provide opportunities like that hopefully isn't, we work to make it a safe space where people can make faux pas but not come away with a bloody nose, or an internal bleeding or something. You can make the faux pas and people can say, okay, but it doesn't work that way for me. Okay, I experience that in this way. And a lot of times the thing that hurts us and the things that make us feel bad are results of traumas that we had that other people don't know about that. And so they can't be sensitive to an event that they don't even know happened, and it's interesting. I find that all of us are in some way victims of these systems that keep us apart. Things happen and then they're covered up, and we seem to be making a new effort to cover up even more things that had been exposed. But that said, it becomes our, let's say, for me, an obligation. You may take it a different way, but I feel it's an obligation to say, no, we're not covering that up. You know, we are going to find ways that we can let each other know, okay, this is where I hurt, and this is where this is how we can better communicate, or even getting the idea that somebody says that, you know, I didn't know that that was a thing. That's a relief. You know, it's like if people realize that, well, I'm not saying it that way because I want to hurt you. I'm saying it that way because that's what I know, right? I make an example of some people, they get their shorts kind of in a bunch when you say colored people. And they don't realize that, well, we have this organization called the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, right? So if you have that as your major is one of the major civil rights organization, I don't know, it just seems like something that's not quite worth arguing about. I mean, okay, I get that, you know, that's old school, but some people don't, they don't get the memo, you know. I read a very interesting article some time ago, and I see if I can try to reference it. But the article was about how 75% of Americans don't know people outside of their social group. You know, they just don't, you know, and so that extends to, like, if you are in a church, if all the members of your church look like you, then chances are your social circle, and if that is your social circle, there's a chance that you have no idea about how most of the country lives, you know. Not even other religions, not even other, let's say, Christian religions. You never go to any church that's not yours. And sometimes you're intimidated from even trying to explore, maybe go to another church and see what they, you know, see what their services even feel like. So when people are that sequestered, you know, or they're that culturally imprisoned, it should be reasonable to expect that they will be ignorant of people's, you know, sensitive points, you know, or things that upset them. I'm not saying it's an excuse for it, but it's a reason, you know. It's cause and effect as far as I can tell. So that, Vicky, that the thing that you expressed, I think is part of what we're trying to accomplish with this program. Sharon, were you going to say something?
No, I wasn't. Just listening, and sorry that I came in late.
Oh, that's okay. We appreciate your presence. So anyway, any other memorable programs or, you know, topics that we've discussed that has made some impact on you?
So I just wanted to say I've enjoyed each one. And so it's hard for me to pick out which one would be the best, but I really feel much more informed in general.
Yeah. Again, that is what we are trying to do, to bring in points of view that are way out. They're central to our lifestyle, but somehow we don't have the opportunities to wrestle with those ideas. That's kind of because a lot of media is one way, and we try to make this a two-way media. I can't say I feel we're always successful at that, but we try to open it up to other people being, you know, having comments, questions, and a conversation between each of you. It doesn't have to be between just me and you, or the guest and you. It can be between, and it should be really between the other participants on the Zoom conference, on this brainstorming.
I was just, this is.
Go ahead, Nico.
I just wanted to share something, you know, after our discussion about the land, and I made the comment that churches were on reservations that had occupied land that the military helped to make possible for them to set up these mission churches and that sort of thing. Well, after having brought that forward, I did have a wonderful discussion with a few other people, and I thought, you know, I need to do some more homework too. I haven't done what I think should be a contribution towards my own, you know, the people who live on the reservation. That is my home reservation. And the book that I'm reading now is called Dakota Cowboy. And it talks about how all these big cattle companies came in, and Cheyenne River was pretty much occupied by several large companies, cattle companies that came up from Texas. And I happened to be young enough that I still was aware of these discussions. And the landscape changed in terms of the way in which different landmarks were referenced when I was younger. And even a piece of land that's on the reservation that the it's called this, it was referred to as the strip, but it is a piece of land that was set aside for cattle companies to move from one end of the reservation to the other. And prior to that, there were a number of, I guess you'd call them foot trails that crossed into that area. And I still remember lots of those names were chiefs' names and different events that took place in that particular area. And so I was talking to a friend of mine about how I listened to the program, the humanities program, and I said I learned a lot of things about that I didn't know about. I didn't know that the tribe, the Rosebud tribe, had well, however it turned about, the gentleman indicated that there was a denial. They did not wish to take ownership of the Episcopal Church land there. And that kind of rattled me a little bit, because I was thinking, why don't I know more about this? So then I got, like I said, I was visiting with another friend, and she said, you need to read this book. It's just, again, about your reservation mostly, but it's called The Cost of Free Land. And I got to thinking about these book bans that were happening all over, and how important it is for young people to be aware of the history of their local area. And we used to say years ago that we lived in the 33,000 zone, which everybody flew over. And so we didn't really know. And it was called the Dakota Outback, and all kinds of things that had to do with we are insignificant, when actually some incredible history happened in this part of the world, because otherwise people would not be eating meat like they are. There would not be a lot of the food items that everybody puts on their plate. That would not be happening if it had not had all these transformations. But at the same time, with these transformations came also lots of other problems, including the health of the people who were changing the way in which they were eating that were healthy. And you've had programs on about the food sovereignty. So these programs that the South Dakota Humanities Council are putting on, I think, are incredibly valuable. They actually they bring to reality what it means to be human, and the kind of issues that are day to day. And in certain pockets of our area where we live, we have different kinds of dynamics that make up our communities. And all of this is so incredibly valuable. I'm so happy that the Humanities Council took this on as a way of bringing more people together. And with that note, I'm still looking to see how I can bring about something called a reading circle about some of these books. Not necessarily a club, but I would really think it would be great if some of these incredible books that have been brought up as a result of the programming could be like a central discussion. You know, I don't know if that's possible, but the land issue up where I am now, all the signs that are on alongside the road have to do with no carbon. I forget what it's called now when you bury the carbon under the ground, and they're all over the place. And I was thinking to myself, okay, here we go again. It's people finally realizing now that they have a vested interest in something that means their livelihood. Now they're all alert. Now they're paying attention. But there is a lot of history behind that before this carbon issue came about. Before that, there's the black snake of the oil pipelines, you know, so that just continues on. So the more we learn about our, not just our state, but the community and how people are addressing some of the things that they know blatantly are wrong, and yet they continue because it always goes back to capitalism. So I've tooted my horn enough now, so I just thought I would bring those things to bear on our discussion and our missing host.
Yes. Well, I really appreciate you bringing those things forward. That's very helpful to us as we go forward. And I would say that one of the things that we've been doing is as we talk about these things, we do often, I can't say without fail, but pretty often we will, if we know of a book, we'll put it in the chat. Now, that said, your suggestion about making a book circle is, I think, is very interesting and potentially very productive idea, especially since we come across various authors who are dealing with the same kinds of subjects that we are dealing with here. And it's not technically, it's not such a big leap to make a bibliography. And in fact, I'm not so sure we don't already have such a thing. If anybody on the humanities staff knows of a bibliography or a place where people could click a link and go to, maybe you could put that link in or tell us about it. You know, just pop on and tell us where people might find that. Or what do you think, humanities staff? Is that it? Could that be a thing that we could, you know, is that within the potential of something to come about?
Yeah, I think that is, Lawrence. I was in the middle of typing in the chat there, so I didn't. My attention was a little bit divided there. But if you could repeat the question, I'd be happy to respond to it.
Okay, so Lanico was saying, well, it would be nice to have like a book circle or someplace where, you know, the books that are mentioned on this program, that, you know, you could make a collection of books, not only that come on this program, but are relevant to these topics. If there could be a kind of a, I guess, if what I'm hearing, Lanico, correct me if I'm misstating you, but something of a bibliography that points to these kind of subjects. They could even be divided into, you know, under, you know, this kind of literature or that kind of literature. But the idea is people are discovering new books and new sources of information about these topics that they would not otherwise know about. And is there some way to put it in some central location so that people could go to it? And then from there, people might start to make some book circles where they could read those books and then have discussion groups, you know, among people they know, even if it's just at coffee, you know. So,
You know, I did hear something, Lawrence. It might be a rumor, but I heard that there were, at one time, there was a group of people donating Native American books that were maybe only one of a kind, to our state library, and then they voted on not to put them out, not to get involved in it. It was, somebody said it and it wasn't said in a good reference. But do you know anything about, there was a collection at one time
No.
of old books, rare books about Native Americans of South Dakota given to the state library for the purpose of just what is it Lanico was talking about, so that people could have access to it?
I have no idea about that. I have not heard about it. If anyone else has, please chime in, and maybe we can sort of search it down, because it's the kind of thing that, you know, if the books are old and out of print, there are sometimes mechanisms by which they can be brought back into print. You know, Google has this massive thing where they're scanning in such books. And then once, if there is, you know, if the copyright is out and there's no person to collect on the copyright, probably the best honor we could do to that author is to make sure that their work does not go into obscurity. So there are some potential things that could be done, but I think first of all is like, well, you know, to maybe investigate what you're saying. Is that, you know, I wouldn't know how to begin, because it's hard to begin with a negative, like, well, this thing doesn't exist, can you find out where it is? You know, it's like, that's a little tricky. But if someone knew of the source of that information, we could maybe follow through on, like, was that a thing? And you did say that that it was under the state library.
That's what I remember hearing. I don't know. I'm old.
Okay.
I hear all kinds of information, but it was a political issue, and it was a
Okay.
touchy one. So maybe nobody even wants to talk about it.
Oh, well, librarians are a funny kind of lot, you know, especially if you don't have them, like, you know, like right in front on, you know, in public or on TV or something. They have a wealth of information, you know, and they don't mind sharing it usually.
I'll try
And
and
there are
check
many
into it.
librarians. I'm sorry.
I'll try and check into it.
Okay, thank you. And please share it with us if you should discover something, and I will look into it as well. Okay, so I'd like to unless someone else has something else they would like to add, I'd like to move on to my next inquisition.
Okay, I'm going to throw in a little bit of comment following Vicky's there. You know, when the Blue Cloud Abbey was what would you call it now? It went away.
Decommissioning.
Decommissioned. There you go. Anyway, that was a collection of, there were a tremendous amount of books there that were part of a research, an archival kind of collection, and lots of people went there to do some study. Anyway, that particular collection was up in the air. Where should we go with that? And I'm not quite sure, but I think Sisseton might have taken possession of it. I'm not sure, but that was part of the discussion. The other thing about the collection of books that Vicki was talking about, I was a librarian, and of course I did other things too in the school, but what ended up as a nasty, I'm just going to come right out and say, the call for Native American literature to go to the state library was an effort to gather up what was no longer contributed by Native American authors in our area. And those were intended to be put into archival use for research. And no literature, no communication came out after that to indicate what those books were, you know, who contributed and why and whatever. I'm reading a book now that, like I said, Dakota Cowboy, which was, there's some derogatory references to Native people in there, but it tells about the land use. And this guy was somebody who was a young man working on in those cattle company on Cheyenne River. The other thing about that collection of books was in, you know, there people talk about these sort of things away from, you know, official ears, so to speak. And what I understand is some of these books that were, authors, and I'll give Elcar Deloria's collection. That collection is in, it's not accessible at the library, at the South Dakota State Library. And I don't believe Elizabeth Cook Lynn's collection of books that materials and all of her notes and research and all, I don't think that's at the South Dakota State Library, as a result of the ways in which politics get involved with sanitizing information. And I think that if people know that these collections are available, there should be some way that librarians and school officials can have some kind of way to get that to the parents, because children need to be well informed if they're going to be able to manage the affairs of their lives ahead of us.
Right.
Go ahead.
Laniko, do you mean that the South Dakota State Library refused to take those books and put them into their archives or stacks or whatever?
It was initially intended that those books were going to be archival research books, because there were so few copies available.
Right.
Now, I know that there are private publishing companies that are taking up this call for reproduction of older books, but the only information I have is, what I was aware of when I was working in the school system. So as far as that research and archival effort, when I had some work I needed to do, I had to go down to the library, and I visited with a lady that I believe has retired now. Her name was Lavera Rose, and she was the archivist for the state library. And we had a conversation about that, and she said, well, that's an ongoing effort, and I don't know what that meant, because I was in a hurry to leave because they were getting ready to close. And so sadly, the ongoing effort has kind of more or less just drifted into a gopher hole. I don't have any idea where that information is available to the general public.
Hmm.
Well, now that we are discussing it here, brainstorming it, I think it really points directly to what I was trying to get at with our subject today, is how do we change that to action? We have 2 or 3 people who have commented on that now, and we have various people on this call. So now the question is, how do we turn that into action? And one of the ways is, if just everyone on this call were to call the state library and say, hey, whatever happened with that? It would be inescapable, that it would be, because probably you would have a different person answer the phone, and then it's going to come up, especially if you wait. Let's say you do it today, and then you wait about a month to 6 weeks, and you call back and say, did we ever get any follow-up on that? Then it's amazing how those kinds of things often have more impact than a TV program or something like that, So that's one way. But I wanted to get back into like the central theme. I'm looking for any kind of events, books, people, or otherwise, that have caused you to develop a new belief or change an old belief. So we have all of these different ideas that we have explored over time, but there are different ways other than brainstorming the human connection that you get data. And what kinds of books or people or any kind of events or something that caused you to develop a new belief or change an old belief? Anybody? Has anybody's belief ever changed?
Well, I feel as though I have some trepidation on what I know, what I believe, what I think. I got the feeling that as I began to try and do some research, my grandfather was down at Cut Meat on Rosebud for a while and tried to dig into it. I found all kinds of things. I found that some of my relatives didn't want me to find out why my grandfather and children were born down there. They were insulted. A couple of people that I ran into and contacted that were Native Americans were reluctant to talk to me. They really didn't. They thought it was unimportant, and I felt like an outsider. I felt like they say how they feel. I felt as though I could not possibly enter into the realm of friendship with the Native American because I was non-Indigenous. That's really, really been hard for me. It hurts. And I know that all kinds of other people get hurt because they're either Jewish or they're another color or they're whatever. But I was sorry that I ended up not feeling welcome. I know that's just probably a personal feeling of mine, but I felt like I couldn't make friends with the Native Americans. And I wouldn't blame them a bit, you know, because of all that has happened. And I'm sorry to say that. I feel that way. And
well,
kind
I
of
would.
a thing.
My response is don't give up. You know, it's like there are a lot of things that don't happen right at the beginning when we first try something, and a lot of it is because when we try something, it feels clumsy. It's like if somebody's going to be a piano player, they can't like start playing piano and say, "Oh, I'll never get this." If they do, they will never get it. You know, it will never happen. And maybe less than piano playing, developing new relationships requires some risk, you know. And I found that when I go through one culture to another, that if I recognize that in no culture are all the people clones, you know, and just because one person sort of like gives you the brush off doesn't mean everybody in that culture feels the same way. And a lot of people, they are carrying, of course, their traumas and, you know, and their pain and their baggage too. And so it's not easy for them to get over, you know, the things that keep them from being interacting with you. It's just not easy. So somebody has to, like, how they say, stay in the struggle, you know. And so if I think if people turn toward like not knowing indigenous people, but knowing a person who happens to be indigenous, and then getting to know that person as a person, then the things that are common, you know, and once you get to know them, you get to know other people, you know, because they have friends, probably, you know. And so it's, you know, at least that's been my approach, and it's worked pretty darn good for me. You know, it's like, okay, I you know, and it's not just with indigenous people here, in cultures around the world. I just like look at that person. If that person, you know, if we seem to have a connection, then I go with that connection. And then if that connection, if you're earnest, and when you're earnest, that connection ends up inviting you to something where you meet other people, and then you develop all kinds of connection. For example, I'll give you an personal example. I was on my way to Puerto Rico one time, and it was a snowing thing. And the daughter of the now deceased Kevin Locke was at the airport, and we were stuck at the airport together, and we got to talking. And then so she said, "Oh, you should know my dad. He does blah 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 blah." So I said, "Well, where is your dad?" He said, "Well, we're over in Standard Rock." Well, this was when early time. I hadn't been in South Dakota that long, and so I went out to meet him. And from that meeting, and from the relationship that developed as a result of he and I becoming friends, and I saw him a lot more than I ever saw Kimamila. And it's like, then I started to know other people like Brian Akipa, it's like, and other people who are Baha'i, which he was very involved in the Baha'i. I never probably would have not likely met many Baha'i people. And as a result, I started going to events and services for Baha'i people, and I met more people. And so this kind of network is just burgeoning out. But I didn't go to say, well, where are all the Baha'is? Let me go and find them. And I did say, where are all the Native Americans? Let me make friends with the Native Americans. I really don't care. These are good people. These are people who, like, we share some values together. I get to know them. And then since they're part of it, they represent not the mythology of what Native Americans are, but they are living examples. If I know them and they're Native people or indigenous people, then I know that much of the culture. I don't know the whole culture, but I know that much, that person's much. Does that make any sense to you, Vicki?
It does, yeah.
Yeah. Sharon, you were going to say something.
No, I wasn't.
Oh, really? See, I'm twisting your arm.
I'm busy typing little questions to Lamiko.
Oh,
I'm
okay.
still way back on the books. But I'm listening. Where is
Okay.
Baha'i? I don't even know where that is. Baha'i?
You say where is it?
Yeah. What country is it, or what peninsula
No,
is
no,
it?
it's a religion.
Oh, it's a religion.
Yeah,
Okay.
it's a religion that is in the Middle East. A very interesting religion. So maybe if we can put something in, Wikipedia link to it. It's a very interesting, and they have quite a presence on various reservations, and they're kind of under the radar, but there's a lot of people. I find that there's quite a community of Baha'i people, and they try to make a difference in terms of the kind of work that they do for their jobs and in terms of in their community. So they are an event.
I would never have guessed that, Lawrence. But when I think about it, one of my tenants was Baha'i. And as he talked about it, and now that I think about the nature of it and the peacefulness and the relationship to everything, it's I don't know what other religion I would compare it to. Maybe what would you compare it to? The Baha'is.
Just
They
itself.
kind of stand alone, but I would never have guessed it would be on the reservation.
Right.
Because
right.
it's so, I think of it either out here in California, I'm in California again now, or possibly in Thailand.
No, Iran, Middle East.
Okay.
And
it
and the
is.
interesting, yeah, and the interesting thing is they do quite a few events, and they also they bring people from all over the world to the reservations because they have their diaspora, and they have like their different places. So like in Standing Rock, I've been there when people like from Samoa would show up, New Zealand, and places like that. And sometimes people will come and they will do projects. They will come and they will stay 6 months or a year doing some project on the res. Like that has been my experience. So they have quite an influence, but you don't hear about them, and they were not one of the colonizing religions. So they have a whole different history of interacting with the reservations and the people who live on those reservations. So any kinds of books, events, people, or anything that has caused your belief system to change, or to have you to develop a new way of seeing things, a new belief system? Anybody? Well, if you think of one, get back to us. I'll go to my next question is, when you learn a new thing, you get a new piece of information, you find something that you didn't know before, what do you do with that? And you can say, well, it depends. Okay, well, make a depends, um, give me an example of, like, okay, I learned this new thing. I had this different experience, which is learning a new thing. How do you catalog it? What do you do with it? Do you just go, oh, that was interesting, and move on? Or or has there ever been anything that you learned new that has changed you as a person? Mike?
Well, I always have something to say.
Oh, yeah.
So I've been a little bit worried about AI, and somehow on Google, I usually look everything up on Google, and there's a gentleman, a young man, 40-ish, his name is Lex, Lex Friedman, and he has a blog spot, and he was German descent, born in Moscow, and now he's over here. I think he works out of MIT in Massachusetts and around. He's apparently supposed to be the brightest man in the world now at 40, better than Einstein, and he has this great mind. But he's working with AI, and AI is a lot scary for a lot of people. It is for me, and he's working on drones or these little robots and so forth. And he was telling me how you can flip these dogs up that they're making and they'll land on their feet. And now he's afraid to kick one because they built in such sensitivity to this robot that you feel that you have hurt it. And this was so amazing to me. And he has such a good nature. He's a very kind person. So I was really happy to hear that we have some scientists that are working on robots with AI that are sensitive human beings and are looking out for the betterment of it, rather than AI being out of control, which we're all afraid of. But this blog spot is important, and he interviews everybody. He's kind of like you, sits down and interviews everyone from all different walks of life. And so I go to Google and get my information.
Great. Mike,
So-
you were, oh, I'm sorry, go ahead, Vicki.
So if that particular AI has the sensitivity of emotion, we don't have just one emotion. We have many, many emotions. And as a result of sensitivity of this particular inanimate object, or everything has life in it, as I believe, but this particular thing is not a human, what prevents us from examining the range of emotions and whether or not that particular thing has the ability to retaliate? And I think that's where lies the confusion about fear of AI, because if we know, we've read and we see in the news about these sensitivities, but we as humans know that we have a huge range of interpretations of emotions. So if we have that happening in an object that has greater potential, how are we protecting ourselves from, in some way, from them not exploring those other emotions and using them against us?
Mhm.
That's where we are, Lanico, in the whole AI discussion. You know, we're talking about sentience, you know, and concepts like that of the artificial intelligence. And one of the side effects is that it's causing us to actually explore in humans exactly what you're talking about, because one of the problems for humans is we have not explored that range of sensitivity in human beings. We don't really understand our emotional state very well, especially when we talk about common knowledge. You know, there are some people who it's their specialty and they can't fry an egg, but they know a lot about, you know, about human sensitivity. But even then, you know, it's on the exploratory stage. So moving forward with AI, that is actually the state of the art is that's the state of the art discussion now. So what happens when? How should we think about this future of AI? Mike, you've been sitting there patiently. Go ahead.
Well, yeah. So I had to get on screen after I ate. I didn't want to interrupt you all with my eating. Yeah, you know, I think you had mentioned somewhere about how you took action too, and so I don't know, maybe your questions are leading to that, but you talked about learning something new and then doing something different, how it changed you. And I mean, one thing for me was I knew for years a gentleman by the name of Mark Sanderson, who Lawrence also knew, that was working up at the prison with inmates for many years, and he and I attended the Unitarian Church together for many years. And I always wanted to go, and I knew that he was doing important work and things, and it wasn't until he was about ready to leave that I decided, well, I better get up there. And I went up there with him, and then I started working in the prison, or volunteering in the prison. And it is um, you know, interesting how I knew he was doing important work. I knew, but you know, we're so clouded with, you know, so much scary information, I guess I would put it, or we've been, you know, you know, a lot of times I always think I was in China at some point for a couple of years, and I remember going there and thinking, you know, they're so brainwashed. They call it, they like to, it translates into Chinese into brain scrubbing, they call it. But then I started seeing my own brain scrubbing as I was teaching them things too, that I had some brain scrubbing, and I think of that with the inmates, and you know, the terrible situation that we have in our prison system, and all over the world, really, prison systems. I mean, just terrible. There are some cases where they're not so bad, but then finally going there, and then you do have to kind of get over the training, I guess. The training that they put you through at the prison is really another scare tactic to some degree too, to scare you, to make you think it's just this, you know, terrible place. There are all these terrible people, and you know, yeah, it just you know, to finally, you know, to go there and to be there year after year of seeing the case. I mean, it took me years to overcome the brain scrubbing.
Yeah. Yeah, that happens. And sometimes it's like with a very fine scrubber, you know, it's like it's very subtle. We don't know it's being done to us. And sometimes it's not so much what people say to us, but what they keep away from us, you know. It's kind of like you could be on the verge of discovering something, having an experience that will give you some insight, not only into others, but more importantly, into yourself, and how effectively we are distracted away from the things that will give us those insights, you know. a good example of that is learning to breathe. You know, we have as kids, we have a certain way that we breathe, and then as we get traumas introduced to us, or we start to default to this shallow breathing, and if we have enough of that, we are always shallow breathing, and the result is it changes our brain structure, without anyone ever saying anything. So we could expose kids, especially in kindergarten or preschool, to how to breathe, not as a punishment, like go sit in the corner and breathe deep. No, not when you get angry, like count to 10 and breathe 10 times. No, not that. As a way of taking care of yourself. Just like you take a bath, you learn to breathe. Just like you cut your fingernails or you make your bed, you learn to breathe in such a way that your brain functions better, and we could teach that, but instead we do, some other thing, or many other things, but that's a kind of brainwashing, I think, as well. We only have like a few more minutes, about 3-4 more minutes. I'm looking, is there anyone who has something that they would like to share, but has not so far? Anybody? Well, hearing none. Oh, Sharon, I'm going to pick on you again. Did you say, were you going to say something?
Like a pincushion, I know. Well, going
It
back
keeps looking like you're trying to say something for whatever reason.
know me too well. Learning about other people or groups or ideas or philosophies or whatever's, I had to get out of my hometown and get around with other people to do that. I had to get out of the church community. I don't have anything against it. I just, and that's how I got to know other people. For example, like this morning, I'd never heard of Baha'i religion. So now I do via Zoom. Imagine that. But there are so many things. I come from the town that was I was the town across the river from Standing Rock. I was amazed about 2 decades ago to go. I was in Mobridge and I walked into this rest cafe and my God, there were 2 Lakota men there in with the whites eating. I mean, this never would have happened when I was a teenager. It just never would have happened. And I thought, God, we're really progressing here a little bit slowly. So how did I know that? Because I was away. Otherwise, I wouldn't have thought of it as progress. I would have thought of it as God. What next? Something like that. Anyway.
One of my hue cries is escape cultural imprisonment. And that's, and like so many of us are culturally imprisoned. We know the people around us, our experiences are as a result quite limited. And so we get into some situations like Vicky was alluding to before when she was talking about how it's like, well, you want to go and meet people, you want to go and have relationships, you want to expand your horizon, but it can be scary, it can be tricky, and you don't want, your whole point is not to offend people, but you're afraid that you will. And that fear is like it's the barrier that keeps us apart. It's an invisible barrier that we walk into, and it's kind of like those electric fences that they put up for dogs or cattle, or the ones that have the sound where you as a dog may not know why you can't go past that point, but things you just know it's bad when you go past up to that point. No, they can't do that. So, or probably the best example are cattle guards, where the cattle like walk up to this space, and sometimes they just paint it, the image on the ground. And now the cattle think that they can't go over and eat that grass that they really want so bad, but that's a big hole. Their eyes see it as a big hole. A lot of us are culturally imprisoned in exactly that way. We can cross, but our internal fears that are sometimes a result of brain scrubbing is keeping us from relationships and experiences that would greatly enhance our lives. I want to thank all of you for joining us today and invite you to join us next week, same time, same station. Thank you and goodbye.